Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
All right, so we're finally getting some more information from the FBI and the state about this kid, Tyler Robinson, that was alleged to be the assassin behind Charlie Kirk's murder. And it's been very garbled. Like I said, over the weekend, the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, kind of left a vacuum open to be filled with reporters quoting FBI sources, supposedly talking about this transgender roommate and trying to tie this shooter to transgender and anti-fascist ideology. Kash Patel even reposted some of that reporting before giving an update. And from before anybody knew anything about this shooter, the media was repeating stories about anti-fascist slogans written onto the bullets and pro-trans agenda stuff written on the bullets, which turns out to not be true. Everything that's on the bullets is like weird online meme references that aren't that connected to anything political. You have the guy saying, "Hey, catch this fascist," which is a video game reference. And you also have this thing about Bella Ciao, which is an anti-fascist song from Italy, but also gets ironically used by the right too. So all of this stuff is obscure. And even based on what the state has released as of now, when it comes to the text messages, none of those memes, according to Tyler Robinson, apparently, were connected to anything overtly political. In other words, this kid was no anti-fascist. He just wasn't. And I sort of could tell that right away, that even with the Bella Ciao thing and whatever they were trying to use to tie him to anti-fascism, nothing about this crime or the things he was saying supposedly have been any form of recognizable anti-fascism or anything like that. So that might be a way to describe his motivation. Maybe he thought Charlie Kirk was a fascist, or apparently thought he was full of hate. But the idea that this guy was connected to some kind of larger anti-fascist effort is just not true. And it seems like because they lacked any information to that effect, they allowed the space to be open for people to run with that rumor on their own, while the FBI and the state of Utah tried to figure out something that they could release that would kind of bolster this narrative that this kid was a left-wing radical. So he also doesn't really appear to be a groyper based on what they have released. And just as the memes that he was referencing aren't super easily tied to any actual anti-fascism, they're not that easily tied to any type of groyper stuff either. It kind of has that aesthetic, and this idea of like memeing as you murder people is definitely something that the right does more than the left. But it's also just part of a new generation of stochastic violence that sometimes seems to have very unclear intentions. So the most comprehensive compiling of messages coming from Tyler Robinson that I've seen is from Ken Klippenstein, who seems to have gotten access to the Discord chat that we've heard so much about, where this kid was supposedly radicalized. At least one of them, the main one, where he had a couple friends, I believe, including his partner or roommate or whatever. But I don't know if that part is confirmed, that partner was in these same Discord chats. And the texts that have been released, that people are passing around, the text between Tyler and his partner or roommate or whatever, those were not in Discord. Those are text messages. So the Discord chats are a little bit more verifiable because there's timestamps, and the source seems to be someone inside the chat. And what you see when you look at these chats is not some kind of hyper-radical anti-fascist echo chamber. And the people who knew Tyler Robinson in this capacity, so in other words, the friends that have been being accused of like being his radicalist agitators that are warping his mind, they viewed him as a pretty normal guy and weren't expecting this to happen at all. And all of the messages that are in these Discord chats kind of correlate with that. This is pretty normal stuff. A little bit of like meme references and things like that, but almost nothing political. And as Ken Klippenstein notes, there's really only a couple references to politics, which would be Trump's impeachment and the election in 2020. Just pretty basic stuff about where Tyler Robinson seems to be passing along information to his friends. So one of the people in that chat does say to him, you would know about this. What's going on with this election? And he was the one who, at the time in 2020, had the information about how the vote counts were going to go late, etc. I remember I had friends who were asking me about the same thing at the time. So that does imply that this was a person who had an interest in politics. But as of right now, from what we've seen, what we have been told about these Discord chats and how this person was supposedly radicalized is not checking out. And the other thing that has raised a lot of people's eyebrows is that in the official charges that were filed against Tyler Robinson, text messages have been released between him and this partner who is supposedly cooperating with law enforcement, where Tyler Robinson lays out in detail that he's guilty of this crime. He left the gun behind. He did the bullet engravings, references the specific things that were engraved on the bullets and said, these are just a meme. I can't believe it. They're going to find this. References the specific model of the gun and who owns it, his father and then his grandfather. All of this is laid out, exactly what he did after he fired the bullet, as well as why he did it. The fact that Charlie Kirk was full of hate and some things can't be negotiated out. Very bizarre. Extremely bizarre that he would just lay all of this out in plain English. And there are definitely people who are not buying it. Surprisingly so, including some very prominent figures on the right. So I mentioned in my last video that Max Blumenthal brought up this thing about Charlie Kirk and Israel, and how before Charlie Kirk died, he was kind of pivoting on Israel, and so he was under a lot of pressure from the Israel lobby, and he had even been offered some money to float his organization, Turning Point USA, which he has accepted money from those same sources in the past, and was in fact buoyed by money like that throughout the life of this organization, and turned that money down, and supposedly was being harassed and was somewhat fearful. You know, not like right as he was about to die, but in the recent months of this year leading up to his death. Although it is noted that there's nothing as of right now to tie the fact that Charlie Kirk was murdered to Israel or any type of operation like that. And also, you know, the idea that Charlie Kirk was turning against Israel is just not really true. He had said a couple things about it. His commitment to Israel was very clear and on the record, and nothing that he did or said indicated that he was going to change his advocacy towards Israel, nor would there be any real motivation for him to do so. Even from the so-called America First perspective, you could still make a tortured argument about defending Israel and blah, 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 blah. And that's much more likely the direction that he was interested in going with his commentary. But the point that Blumenthal makes that I do think is a little interesting is that Kirk, while he may not have been some vociferous critic of Israel that was like coming out and saying like, I'm, you know, making himself an enemy of theirs, by opening up space within his organization, which essentially is synonymous with the grassroots organization behind Trump, it's really the same effort. A huge amount of the AstroTurf and grassroots effort of Donald Trump's campaign that helped him become more popular with young people is spearheaded by Charlie Kirk. And so at this TPUSA event, you know, he's got Tucker Carlson criticizing Israel and Bill Ackman, a huge Zionist donor, as well as Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk having conversations about Epstein being a Mossad agent and possibly allowing October 7th to happen in order to carry out their political goals as a response, as well as different conversations that were happening at this event, this Turning Point USA event. By allowing space within the organization, he is opening the door to criticism of Israel within the Turning Point USA movement, the actual organization behind Donald Trump. You're opening the door for that Israel criticism in a way that Charlie Kirk had specifically rejected throughout his career with Turning Point USA. So the whole Groyper Wars thing is specifically about the fact that people, from Nick Fuentes's dark corner of the internet would show up at these events and try to get Charlie Kirk to talk about Israel, and he would refuse to do it. So the reason that Nick Fuentes hated Charlie Kirk so much is because he refused to change his tune about Israel. And that is exactly how they want him to behave. It's not just about him saying this or that about Israel. Because even Israeli propagandists can recognize that you have to have some kind of air of reasonability for anybody to take you seriously if you're talking about issues. But the fact that he was opening the door within his organization, that was something that potentially the Israel lobby and the intelligence forces behind Israel, they possibly took that as a very serious threat. As well as the fact that this idea that there were negotiations and stuff going on with Charlie Kirk behind the scenes and Bill Ackman, where they were trying to get him to come off of his criticism of Israel, or perhaps they had noticed that he was doing certain criticism of Israel and they were trying to gather him away from it, and he rejected those efforts. So my only point in saying this is that this narrative is picking up steam in certain places on the right. Candace Owens is talking about this. Steve Bannon is talking about this. And there are others. And a lot of people are recognizing the same sketchiness of the story that the FBI and the Utah state is giving us about who this kid is, how he was caught, how he did it, and how we know all of this. And so the point I made in the last video I made about this topic is not that I think it's true or that somehow this murder of Charlie Kirk is some kind of operation by Israel. As of right now, it doesn't make sense. Based on what we know, there doesn't seem to be a lot of room for that to be what happened. But the right wing is becoming increasingly open to the idea that what we're seeing and the narrative that we're getting on Fox News and in the right wing channels of information is a distraction. So whether they think that's because Israel killed him or something else, whatever, I don't care. What I care about is the fact that that is chipping away at the credibility of the narrative that this was trans, Antifa, the left, super soldiers. And Donald Trump immediately came out and diverted attention to the left when this happened because he wanted his people to start talking about that. So if large and prominent voices on the right, even if they're not directly criticizing Trump, but they're criticizing people pretty close to Trump, like Kash Patel, and they're criticizing the official narrative, and they're picking apart this idea that the narrative we are getting from these official sources is actually what happened. And that's good for one reason, which is that it diffuses some of the anger that is being directed specifically towards trans people and the left in general. Now, when it comes to Donald Trump and Stephen Miller, they're going to try to do whatever they're going to try to do. I don't know if Stephen Miller is going to try to use Palantir to try to track every leftist in America, or they're going to try to crack down on like the donor apparatus of the Democrats, which is already what they were trying to do. But doing that in a legal sense through the courts is not necessarily going to bear fruit. So the other thing that you can do is use the force of the state to crush them in some sense, which is possible, but I'm just not sure what that looks like. So my point is that that's going to happen either way. And we know that Candace Owens and Steve Bannon and others like them are still in favor of that. They're not going to oppose that just because they think something's fishy about this narrative. But they are very prominent voices. And if they're spreading the idea, continuing to spread the idea within the MAGA base that they are being lied to, that Trump and his affiliates and the people behind him are lying, that's good, because that creates space to say the left is being scapegoated here. The left is not your real enemy, and your real enemy is getting away with it. And so that seems to be what's motivating Candace Owens, who is crazy. I mean, Candace Owens is full on crackpot. She talks about flat earth. She talks about how the president of France's wife is a secret trans person. You know, she's absolutely nuts. But the fact that in this case, because she is such a rampant transphobe and is one of the people who is foaming at the mouth to find a way to attack trans people in any instance. And yet on this, she feels like that's a diversion. And I don't know if she specifically said that the trans angle is a diversion, but what these people are getting at is that there's something bigger going on here that they're not being told. So if what they are being told is that this is a giant left-wing radical conspiracy, it's good for more and more people who are hearing that to not buy it, and to be given permission to not buy it, and to not uncritically roll with that narrative. So all I'm saying is that it's a positive development in this narrative because it's a meaningful fracture, and some of the most danger that is faced by trans people or anybody who can be tied in with whatever their vision of the left is, they are most endangered by people in the streets and people that are part of these roving gangs, like the one that was marching through Huntington Beach Patriot Front wearing shirts identifying themselves as Nazis. Those are the ones who are going to go out and kill people. Or this young black kid who was found hanging from a tree, lynched in Mississippi. I mean, that's how they respond to this sort of thing. And this is the type of thing that activates the KKK, the neo-Nazis. And so people are still at risk from them regardless. And the idea that anything is going to pour cold water on that right now is unlikely. Except those are also the people who are most susceptible to some narrative about how Israel's controlling everything and trying to trick you. And obviously then the risk becomes that they might go after Jewish people instead, which is obviously not preferable. I'm not trying to redirect the violence. I'm trying to redirect the thrust of this narrative, which might go a long way to sort of moving on from this event, as well as potentially refocusing some of the attention on like the power structure and the intelligence operations of Israel as related to Epstein, Trump, and Gaza, instead of Jews, trans people, and leftists on the ground being targeted. So if we can make these people feel tricked, because this narrative that we're getting from the state is obviously flawed, and very well parts of it could be fabricated. I know that we are rationalists on the left and pragmatists, and I am that as well. I don't normally jump to conspiracies. I don't know that this is a conspiracy, and it really bears repeating that there's no evidence at all that this was some kind of foreign op, except for the fact that there was some speculation and that they had quote-unquote foreign sources. That was one of the things that we were hearing from pretty high-level outlets when there was this vacuum of information. And now we get this story about a kid who's supposedly Antifa and trans, but they're really twisting themselves into pretzels to try to make that true. And if it is true, and he wrote all this stuff on the bullets for apparently no reason and then left it and then openly talked about it, why would he put that in writing? Maybe he's just an idiot. I don't know. But all I know is that what we were hoping for is an inconvenient perpetrator for them. And while that is somewhat true, we're not off as easy as being able to just say this kid was right-wing and move on. Even though that's what a lot of people have rolled with, that's not 100% verified either. And at least based on what they're putting out, this was a person who was more sympathetic to whatever his trans partner or something like that, at least in his motivations for doing this. Certainly not to say that what he did made any trans person in the world more safe. But all I know is that Candace Owens and Steve Bannon are two of the most trusted voices on the right. And if they feel suspicious enough about this to keep talking about it, that is going to chip away at this narrative that trans people are responsible for the death of Charlie Kirk. And that is 100% how they would like to lionize and canonize Charlie Kirk, is as a martyr against trans and leftist and anti-fascist ideology. So if even some of the biggest, most subversive voices on the right, obvious liars, but that's not the point, if they are the ones who are chipping away at that narrative, then over time it could take hold, and that would be a positive development.